I'm photographer David duChemin, and this is Vision is Better, a sometimes weekly podcast about the craft and art of photography. Welcome here. Good morning, this is David duChemin, and this is episode 35 of Vision is Better. This is a ScreenFlow only episode. I'm just back from a weekend of diving, and neither my studio nor I are fit for the camera. But I did want to show you a couple things in Lightroom that I find very useful, one of which I've just learned and I'm particularly excited about. Of course, with any technology, especially software, things are often changing, and especially when that software just kind of automatically updates itself. Suddenly you find that there's new things, and I was taught this by a friend of mine, Jason Bradley, who's just written a wonderful book about Lightroom, and he showed me the first trick that I'm going to show you, and then I'm going to show you a couple other things that I find really helpful in my day-to-day Lightroom use, my use of Lightroom. So here's a photograph of a stellar sea lion on the beautiful British Columbia coast, what we call the Great Bear Sea or the Salish Sea. This is completely unretouched. I have sort of noodled around with it, but I haven't cleared out any of the spots or anything like that. And you can see that I've plunged my blacks over here. So anyway, let me show you a couple of things here. The first relates to actually both the radial filter and the graduated filter. So let's imagine that I want to take this, actually let's do it with the graduated filter. I want to take this graduated filter and I wanted to bring back some of the, there we go. So what you saw there was a hidden view of this graduated filter. You can get that by pressing H so that you can't see the pins anymore. And then you also saw the mask, which you can get by pressing the keystroke O. So if you want to see what your mask looks like. But that's not what I wanted to show you. What I wanted to show you is if I bring this back down, let's say I really wanted to bring this back in, which of course I wouldn't. This is it's not even a little heavy-handed. It's very heavy-handed. But let's say for the sake of argument, I did want to do that. You can see again, there's my mask. So I've darkened the sky, but I have effectively darkened parts of the sea lion that I probably don't want darkened. And remember, you can do this in both the graduated filter and the radial filter. So while the graduated filter is still active, or in the case of the radial filter, of course, the radial filter, you'll notice here there's new, edit, and brush. If you press brush, again, while that pin is still active, and you go down here, you'll notice that you see A, B, and erase. And I'm just going to focus on erase right now because it's what I've been playing with and what I understand. But if you click erase, you'll notice that where your cursor is, that brush takes on a negative sign right in the very middle. There's a minus sign. Now when you paint on here, you can, while the graduated filter is active and looks like this, you can very easily brush away some of that graduated filter. So for those of you that are photographing landscapes, you might, for example, have a mountain peak in the middle of your horizon. You could, and again, you got to be subtle with this stuff, you could drag a graduated filter down to your horizon, darkening up the sky a little bit, or pulling back highlights, or adding a little bit of clarity to punch the clouds, and then very quickly with this brush tool erase part of that graduated filter. One of the reasons you might want to do this is so that you're not adding change on top of change. You're not taking, for example, you're not dropping the exposure and then adding another, say, an adjustment brush where you're painting positive exposure in. That's different from this, where you're just taking away some of the effects of that filter. So now you've painted out some of that, and this is a bit of a rough job. I use a very heavy brush, not a heavy brush, a heavy filter on my brushes, so that the transition off of things is very smooth and graduated. So you'll see down here, my flow is lower. It's not 100%. And my feather is at 100%, so that it's nice and subtle. So if I do that and then go back to here, you'll see the change. All right, so you can, again, you can do that in your radial filter, you can do that in your graduated filter, and I find this, having only just discovered it, I find this quite amazing, and I'm thrilled. I've been saying for years that I felt we needed some kind of functionality like this, so I'm glad that it has finally happened. So that's the first thing that I want to show you. Second thing I wanted to show you relates to the spot removal tool. So you can, and I have taught this before, but there have been people that have shown this recently to for whom this was new, and I wanted to show it to you. You can spend a lot of time going through your image and removing spots, and wouldn't it be great if you could actually, if you had a way to see those spots a little better? Well, of course there is. It's down here. It's called Visualize Spots. This is not what's new to most people, and this feature is not new. It's just many people don't know about it. So it's great that you can do that. However, if you're all the way up here and you're spotting your image, especially if you're using a Wacom tablet, to go all the way back down here, which on a large screen, you know, it's a lot of back and forth and it takes time. But wouldn't it be great if there's a keystroke? And there is, and that keystroke is the letter A. So if you hit A, you can immediately affect that or activate that Visualize Spots tool. And then if you want a little bit more refining on that mask to either be a little more specific or a little more granular, you can move the slider at the bottom of the screen. So anyway, I find that one particularly useful. The other question I got was in relation to printing, specifically when you're treating your images with a fairly heavy treatment, like for example, if you use the Fujifilm Velvia film emulation, which tends to really plug your blacks up and give you nice inky blacks. I have some nice inky blacks in this image. You can see down here that I've got no shadow detail, and you activate that by clicking this little triangle on and off just to see what is, because of course right now I can see that I'm losing some detail in the shadows, but which shadows am I losing them in? I look up here and I go, actually, I really don't mind that I'm losing detail there. But what if you wanted to do something much more heavy-handed in terms of your blacks? So let's do a black and white image. Let's go strong contrast. You can see that I'm starting to plunge even more. And just for the sake of doing this, if I wanted to really knock the blacks back, I'm going to just do a real quickie here, just so you can see so. All right, so we've got our C-line print. Let's pretend we think that's worth printing. One of the questions that I have received recently is, David, you're plunging your blacks intentionally, but what does that do when you print? Because right now, with all of this loss of detail, when I print this right now, it's going to completely saturate the paper with ink. There's not going to be, it's just going to be ink upon ink. And the same thing is true over here and they're not in this image, but if these were completely blown out, like for example, if I pushed, if I pushed these highlights in the image and really wanted to blow them out, this is just going to turn this into an awful mess. But so now I've got blown out highlights and I've got plunged shadows. And if this were the image that I wanted to print, what would I do? I would go into my tone curve here. So I would pull this down over here until you saw the highlights come back, right? And you can do it if you activate it as well. So I pulled the tone curve down, and it doesn't take much, but I've pulled it down, and now I'm not regaining detail, but I am, when I print, I am going to get a better print, because the paper, I will not just have pure paper over here in the highlights, and over here I don't want pure ink. So if I go to the shadows and I just raise it, and it doesn't have to be much. Again, I'm not going to regain any detail, but I am going to get a better print. So for those of you asking, what do you do on these really high contrast images where you've got a lot of white or you've got a lot of black, and that's the look you want, but you also want a really great print? My solution is to go into the tone curve and just pull the whites back just a hair, pull the blacks back just a hair, and generally speaking, it keeps the aesthetic of the image while giving you a much better print. So those are 3 tips for Lightroom, tips that I am using increasingly, I would say every day, but the one of them, of course, I just learned. I hope they're helpful for you. Thanks so much for joining me. Remember, gear is good, but vision's better. We'll see you next time.